Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Divinity Original Sin? So this version we're playing right here, and I say we because there is a developer playing with me. You will not be hearing from him today. The reason being that I'm experimenting with formats, and the overall feedback from PAX indicated that you'd actually prefer solo commentary, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. The version is a pre-alpha. This game, as of the time of recording, currently has a couple of days left on Kickstarter. It has exceeded its goal, so it very much looks like it is going to be released. However, I was able to get access to a preview build, and I want to show it to you. This is going to be an edited video because the piece of footage that I took is over an hour long. There's no way I can really commentate all of it, so I will edit it to show you the appropriate parts. Please bear in mind, before we go on, this is pre-alpha. Pre-alpha. That means it ain't frickin' finished. Not even close. It doesn't even have sound. That's how unfinished this damn thing actually is. So, you understand that? Cool. If I see any whining from you in the comments about this, I will verbally bitch slap you. Quit it. No. Alright, good. Excellent. So, Divinity Original Sin is part of the Divinity series, which included Divine Divinity, Beyond Divinity, and Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, which was then remade into Dragon Knight Saga, which was significantly better. What is it? I would say it's an action RPG, but it's actually not. It is a CRPG in the classic sense of the word. So what does that mean? It means conversations. Can I have a look at what's going on here? So, here's what happened at the start of this playthrough. We were able to discover a book on a corpse, and we then had a discussion. I say we because the red-headed character is the developer, the blue character is me, and we are actually having a legitimate in-game conversation using a dialogue system. This game is a co-op game. You don't have to play it in co-op, but you can, and if you do, you're going to have these conversations with each other. When an exclamation mark appears above the head of the characters, when you click, you can initiate a conversation dialogue, and you can actually disagree with each other. If you do, what will happen is various stats will appear. You will actually grow social stats on your character. Now, this is not just here for window dressing. As it turns out, this conversation system legitimately works with actual decisions, and you can argue down the other player to the point where you or the other player gains control of that particular decision. So, let me show you what exactly I mean by that. What do we have here? It's a shell. The shell, for some reason, is having a conversation with us. So, as you might imagine, in pretty much any CRPG, you've got a bunch of different things that you can talk to him about. There's a lot of dialogue in this game. Huge amount. Almost like Planescape Torment levels of dialogue. Lots and lots of things to discuss. So, talking about a few different things. Now, this shell really does want to be back into the ocean. We could help him out. Possibly. Or, alternatively, we could decide not to do that. We have a decision to make. We could do the shell a favor and throw him back like he asks, or we could keep the shell and sell the pretty pearl that hides within. Those are the two choices that I have as a player. So, that one's nice and easy. It's just a binary choice, right? Not quite. So, here's what happens. If you select that, then the other player has the option to actually respond, and has the option to argue with you. They can just agree with you, and then the whole decision goes through, or they can actually argue with you. Now, this argument can go back and forth a little bit, and the result will be determined on stats. So, based on how persuasive you are, based on the kind of statistics that you have and the kind of arguments that you use, it varies the actual decision and what finally ends up happening. That is a really interesting system. That is something that I haven't seen done before. If it has been done, it has not been done in a game that I personally have known about. So as you can see here, other player, wants to keep the shell and sell its pearl. I don't want to do that. So what can I do? I can try to intimidate, I can try to charm, I can try to reason. And of course, that's tied in to statistics. Now, the way that this is tied into statistics is not finalized yet. So the developer was telling me that they originally had Intimidate tied to Strength. However, the community turned around and said, this is dumb, that means you can't be an intimidating wizard. It's like, well, yes, you can be an intimidating wizard. Wizards are very intimidating. That would be terrible. So at the moment, these are a bunch of placeholder social stats that are kind of under the hood and don't really make a huge amount of sense. That is something they're going to be resolving. It is pre-alpha, which means that literally everything is subject to change, although they have a lot of content within the game at the moment, but they're changing systems around. So in this case, I'm going to reason with my companion, saying, hey, you know what? What's one pearl really worth? It's clearly more valuable for us to throw him back, and maybe he'll end up rewarding us later. And what is going to end up happening is that my companion is once again going to disagree with me, and eventually the conversation will resolve in favor of one player or the other. That's really intriguing to me, because it is not something that you generally see in cooperative gaming. The idea that you can actually argue about different decisions in very much an RPG-like fashion harks back to the notion of pen and paper. It also harks back to the dialogue-heavy, old-school CRPGs like Planescape, like Baldur's Gate, and things like Icewind Dale, and so on and so forth. So, to me, that is very interesting, something we don't really have an awful lot of. Don't really know if they plan on voice acting this whole thing, but right now, of course, there's no sound, so it's really rather hard to do. I would imagine a lot of this is going to be text only. So, there you go. Alright, well, in this case, she intimidated me and was able to successfully do that, so we end up stealing the shell. The shell is, needless to say, not particularly happy about that, and we end up running off with it. It's pretty cool, isn't it? The way that the dialogue systems work in this game is really quite nice. The standard NPC stuff is exactly how you would expect it to be, but the conversations between the characters, who are set up in a co-op manner, now that is very interesting. Now, let's look at a little bit of combat. You can see a hotbar down to the bottom there. What does that do? Well, this is not actually an action RPG. It looks like one. The way that you run around is very much in the style of Diablo. However, that's not how things actually work. The world operates in real time until you actually go into combat. Once you end up going into combat, you end up in a turn-based system. So let me show you what I mean by that. We're going to go fight a couple of guards a little bit later down the trail. Funnily enough, this combat didn't even have to happen. It's simply because I got aggressive, the guards were drunk, and we started a fight. This actually does have some repercussions, even if it's just in the dialogue that you hear later from other people. Here we go, 'tis time to battle. Now, interestingly enough, my companion was not actually close enough to get involved in this fight. However, outside of the battle area, you are able to still move around freely in real time, which means that the player can eventually get into range. Now, it's a system whereby you have an initiative order, as you can see right there, so I'm actually able to fight, and it's based on action points. The action points are down at the bottom there. So I've got a variety of different abilities that I can use, including fireballs. Yes, indeed. There you go. The main problem with fireballs is that they also do AoE, so I have successfully set myself on fire in the process, which is a little bit awkward. So the combat system seems fairly standard from here. You can see that it's a case of user action points to either move or cast spells and so on and so forth. You have the ability to flank, and you also have the notion of attack of opportunity, which happens if you try to disengage from melee range. Stuff also gets in your way, so firing through cover or terrain doesn't generally work all that well, with the exception of certain abilities like, say, the lightning bolt, which can pass through that kind of stuff. I can do something like this, perhaps. I am currently out of mana, so I guess I'm just going to have to beat on him a little bit. Now, this doesn't seem that interesting from first glance, so let's look at something a little bit more complicated, a little bit of a more difficult battle, where some interesting interactions come into play in terms of the various elemental types within the game. Now, we've moved to the beach outside of one of the big towns, and we're going to be fighting some orcs. These guys are just a little bit tougher. So this is going to be an interesting fight. Now, I do have a lot of mana this time around. Unfortunately, I'm currently out of range with my lightning bolt, so I'm not really going to be getting too far with that. Now, what I'm going to show you is the idea that various elemental types of magic have various different effects, and they interact with each other. There are definitely games that have done this before. Dragon Age had some spell combos, which was one obvious way of making that happen. The way that Magicka worked, for instance, if you made a monster wet, then using lightning attacks would be fairly effective. You would have fire melting ice and so on and so forth. This is very much brought into the game, but since it's a turn-based combat system, it's a little bit more tactical, and you can set up some pretty cool combos. So what this woman is going to do right here, I forget her name, honestly. She's going to summon an ice elemental, and this ice elemental is a unit that we have control over, so it can fight. It's going to get pretty beaten on, unfortunately. So let's fast forward a little bit and see what actually happens. Now, the ice elemental's gonna die. So what happens when you break an ice elemental? Well, it shatters into pieces, and you might think it would just disappear. Well, no, it doesn't. When you do that to a creature like that, it actually shatters and melts on the floor. That is now an ice patch on the floor. So what can then happen is if an enemy tries to move over it, it has a chance of slipping, or I, for instance, have a chance of slipping as well. But there are other things you can do. Right now, I've got this nice fire patch down on the floor, which is doing its best to try and keep that orc at bay, which is pretty cool. We were hoping the orc might actually slip over. Orcs are very low agility, they generally do that, but unfortunately in this case it was able to walk across that icy patch on the floor, and nothing ended up happening. But it's okay, I put him down with a flare attack. So, what would happen if we then melted the pool of ice? Is that something you can actually do? And more to the point, does it have any effect? There you can see one of the characters actually slipping over on the ice, trying to get to the other side of it, hoping the orc would move onto the ice so that he would slip over so that we could do damage to him there. Didn't really work out the way that we planned. But it's okay. I can come up with something. Don't worry, I am a mighty, mighty hero indeed. That's just why I'm getting as far away from this orc as humanly possible. Orc's now charging towards the ice patch. What if I were to get some fire involved here? Well, I would love to do that, but one, I've fallen flat on my ass, and two, I don't actually have any magic. So this didn't really go all that well. But what if I were able to get some magic? Yeah, I should have a mana potion or a restoration potion that I could use. So let's try something a little bit pyrotechnical. Alright, a couple of turns later, and I'm able to cast a fireball, which I do right there. Looks great, fantastic, he's down on his arse. Let's hit him with something else, which unfortunately AoE'd and hit everyone else in the party. But as you noticed, the ice on the ground actually ended up melting. Now, this is water, which means that you can chain that with other stuff. So if you start to use electricity and things like that, then it will end up being more effective. In fact, being wet, actually being soaked in water, is very much in effect. If you do that, you can deal with the whole notion of being on fire. So kind of like this, using a rain spell, for instance, will allow it to happen. You'll notice there's now a wet condition. It even actually shows the shimmer on the actual model itself, which is really quite a lot of detail. And at that point, I could then throw a lightning bolt, which would be super effective in that regard. If I threw it at a pool of water, then it would affect everybody in it, and so on and so forth. I think you can see the point here. There's actually a significant amount of strategy involved in the combat, and they're apparently designing this around the idea of you having a party of 4. You will have henchmen and companions, which will take you up to 4, and you will be able to engage in tactical battles that are turn-based in this regard. I like the battle system an awful lot because I'm the kind of person that likes those tactical battles. Obviously, some people may not enjoy the pacing, but I personally really, really do. So that's something that I really dig. Alright, so you've seen how the combat works. Let's go and look at some exploration, because this game's kind of full of that, and there's a lot of looting and a lot of interesting things involved in that. So, we shall have a visit to the town. Alright, so the town is pretty large. That's the one that they currently have on display here. There's a lot of different side quests that you can end up getting. Now, there's no big exclamation mark above the head of a character, right? You don't go and pick up quests. You learn about them sort of Mass Effect-ish style by overhearing stuff that's going on and talking to various people. You can then talk to your companion about it, and you maybe can end up coming to a conclusion as a direct result. So the quests and things that happen usually happen as a result of learning things, rather than, hey, there's a big exclamation mark over there, better click on that because there's probably some loot involved, and so on and so forth. You can see there's a metric ton of dialogue choices here. Now, in this case, this female orc has apparently been charmed by a love potion, and they're trying to decide whether or not to kill her, because otherwise she would horribly murder everybody. One of the guards is arguing that no, she won't, because she's completely under the spell of the love potion. The other one's arguing that it's a feral beast, you should get rid of it. Now, you can actually help influence this particular decision. However, if you don't, then they'll make their minds up on their own, which is pretty cool. And as you can imagine, there will be consequences to all of this stuff. The game seems to be absolutely loaded with choices like that. One of the examples that the developer gave was on the subject of the mayor of this town, who has attempted to acquire an illegal staff, a very powerful weapon. Now, he asks you at some point if you could go and retrieve it, and he'll pay you for it. You can. and you can give it to him, and everything will be wonderful and well. And while it is illegal, he wants it to be able to defend the town from marauding, rampaging orcs. So, there's a good reason for you to do it. Alternatively, you can turn him in to the town guards. You can let them know there as long as you can present evidence. Or you can go and get the staff and just keep it for yourself. You could just not get the staff at all. You have a reasonable number of choices. This is very much the way that old CRPGs were done, and even new stuff like Dragon Age was done in a fairly similar fashion. It seems, unfortunately, like games have recently turned away from that to more of a binary choice system, and personally, I welcome our new dialogue-driven overlords. It's been a while since we've had a game that is really focused on that, and it looks like we're about to get a whole lot more with stuff like Wasteland, as well as Project Eternity, the brand new Torment, and things like Shadowrun Returns. It's very, very cool to see that kind of thing. The game's also got a fair amount of freedom, as you can see right here. We ran into this area, and suddenly we're being attacked by the guards. The reason this happened is because earlier, one of our characters went in to the private home of somebody, and let's just say she got a little bit pervy. She ended up in the bathroom while someone was taking a bath, and the noblewoman was very upset about that, ended up calling the guards. What ended up happening was the co-op character tried to argue her way out of it, failed to do so, and now approaching this area will get you attacked by the guards. Now, it won't bring in other guards unless there are guards in the area to bring in, so as long as you get rid of these guards and there is nobody in sight, then everything should be just fine and dandy. The game also features stuff like stealing and so on and so forth, so you can just go and slaughter NPCs if you like. You can attack, as far as I can tell, you can attack pretty much any NPC and kill them. Obviously, it will have a consequence. I would imagine there are some NPCs that can't really be killed because they're required for the actual game itself. The story can't progress without them. However, it's nice to actually see that option there. I feel that a great deal of risks can be taken by the player, and that opens up some interesting choices. The notion of NPCs not being around is something that a lot of modern devs seem to be afraid of doing. And I can definitely understand it, because there's all sorts of possibilities of that going horribly wrong. But yeah, that is very much there indeed. Those of you wondering whether or not this Divinity game allows you to throw objects around, just like the previous ones, well, yes it does. What a wonderfully useful feature it is as well. Currently, the pre-alpha build actually bugs out to the point where you can put the crates in your inventory, which starts to get just a little bit weird. Speaking of bugs, I got stuck here. It took me a while to get out. They ended up having to get something called a teleportation pyramid, I believe, to get me out of there, which seems like an awful lot of work to climb over a 2-foot-high rope. But there you go. Pre-alpha is very much pre-alpha. The game also features a rather interesting crafting system, which is very much based on point and click. So you are able to combine various items together in order to create new items, which is very standard, but the way that it's done is very much use X with Y in the point and click style, which is a nice little system. It's well implemented. Alright, so what do I think of it? Well, for when I played of it, in its pre-alpha state, obviously it's rough as hell, and there seems to be a ton of stuff that needs to be resolved. But I think it's showing a lot of promise. I don't know how the hell they're going to make the conversation system actually work in a way that's not frustrating, but I guess it's also a price that maybe needs to be paid to give that deeper co-op role-playing experience. You can agree with your partner all the time if that's what you want to do, or alternatively, you can have something which emulates more of the pen and paper experience. I think that's what they're trying to do here. Seems like they might succeed. There's an interesting piece of innovation there, I feel. The combat system is fairly standard, but it's well executed. It's got a lot of strategy to it. It's turn-based with action points, which I always like. That SRPG stuff is always fantastic. And the game has an interesting sense of humor. You're able to talk to animals, for instance, which in itself it seems extremely strange, but you are able to do it because you are a magic user within this world. There's a lot to do, there's a lot to see. It's graphically, I wouldn't call it impressive, but it's definitely nice looking. It reminds me of old school CRPGs, and that is very much a good thing. A lot of bugs to iron out, but a lot of potential here. Now, let me talk a little bit about Kickstarters before I actually wrap this video up here. People have been asking me, what's the difference between Kickstarter and pre-order? Why do you support Kickstarters but don't support pre-ordering? All right, both of these things are a risk. Some would argue that kickstarting is a greater risk than pre-ordering, and to be honest, they're probably right. You can cancel a pre-order. Once you've given your money through Kickstarter, you don't generally get a refund, and the product may not come out. But that's also the thing, isn't it? You know that the product is being supported directly by you, and you are actively paying money to improve the product. Pre-ordering a video game does not improve the product in any way, shape, or form. It is a marketing method that is used to make it more likely that you will carry through with your plan to buy the game. This even means that if you hear a bunch of bad things about it, you're still more likely to do it because you have the idea in your head, I pre-ordered, I'm getting some bonuses, I made this plan to buy this game. I explained this in my pre-order video. Kickstarting is essentially the same thing there, but in many cases, these games will not get made unless they actually get paid for. And the more money that is given to them, the better the final product will end up being. That's the key difference between the two. Now, the question is, of course, do you want to take risks on Kickstarters? I think that if you have to ask that question, you shouldn't be kickstarting. This is a situation where you are throwing money at an idea. You are throwing money at the notion that something might end up happening. And that is a risky thing to do. If you do not have that kind of disposable income, then you flat out should not be doing it. But when you do it, it has a positive impact. In my opinion, pre-ordering games has nothing but a negative impact on the industry. Whereas Kickstarter has already had a positive impact on the industry. It has meant that great games have come out that would otherwise not have appeared. And this is a very strong thing indeed. Kickstarting allows you to put your money where your mouth is and influence the games industry. You can make a product happen in your own small way. You might say, well, pre-ordering does that. No, it doesn't. There's no difference between you pre-ordering and then buying the game later down the line. A sale is a sale one way or the other. And while some people might look at marketing metrics and say, hey, this number of pre-orders is really, really good, right? That is not the main metric they're looking at. At the end of the day, it comes down to the amount of money they actually end up making from the product, and that pre-order sale can cost you just as much as the sale that you buy later down the line when you are more informed about the product. If you have any doubts about a Kickstarter, you should never do it, in my honest opinion. If you do not have disposable income to throw at Kickstarters, you should simply not do it. It makes more sense to buy existing games that you know are good rather than spend your limited income on a Kickstarter. If you have a particular passion for a project and there's something that you really want to see made, and if you happen to have the disposable income to support that, then as far as I'm concerned, you should do it. But you should always go into it knowing that it's a risk. At the end of the day, I completely understand people drawing parallels between the two things because, in essence, they can end up having the same result, right? You have the idea that if you pre-order a game, you receive it on launch day. If maybe you get a discount, maybe you get some kind of bonus. If you kickstart a game, you often also get it on launch day, or even before that, you tend to get it cheaper, and so on and so forth. Has kind of the same effect. It can be treated as pre-ordering games, but it is a case of saying and voting with your wallet, saying, this is the kind of game that I personally want to see made, and I'm willing to put money on the line to personally help in my small way to fund it. I think that's a significantly more honorable practice, and it's otherwise a case of your principles. And if you don't believe the way that I do, then cool. Yeah, it's up to you. One way or the other, Divinity is on its way. Looks like it's coming out. They have already passed their Kickstarter goal. They're looking at stretch goals right now. You can check out the link in the description below this video if you wish to support it. There's probably going to be about 48 hours remaining by the time that this video goes up, so not a huge amount of time, but otherwise you will be able, of course, to buy it on launch day. I feel it's got an awful lot of promise. It seems to have a well-realized world and interesting combat system, plenty of old-school CRPG mechanics and tropes that are really attractive to me, as well as some innovative co-op dialogue choices. Looks like a cool world to explore, man. Something I would be interested in playing once it comes out. Now, before I leave, I would like to share with you something interesting, something new, something that you will not have heard before. I have a rough cut of a piece of music from this particular game, which has not been released in full, and I'm going to put it on the end of this video. So thank you very much for watching, folks. That was a preview of the pre-alpha version of Divinity Original Sin, which will be coming out to PC and is currently on Kickstarter. My name has been TotalBiscuit, and I will see you next time.
Oi,